Hello. Welcome to the breakout session. If you can all take your seats. Hi, welcome. I'm Jana Pastor. I'm the Director for the Division of Health Promotion with the North Dakota Department of Health and a very happy partner for the speakers we're going to have in this session. I'm joined on the stage with Josh Askvig. He'll introduce himself in a little bit as our second presenter. And you'll have to excuse me. I'm going to read a portion of the bio of our first one. I'm very excited. Smart Money is going to be a wonderful panel for you guys today. We will not have time for question and answers, so if you have anything that comes up, please come and see me during a breakout session and I'll get you connected directly so we can answer your questions or have follow-up conversations. Our first speaker today is Nick Buettner. He is the Vice President of Product and Community Integration with BlueZones. He's responsible for leading development and implementation of the BlueZones projects in BlueZones communities all across the United States. They're a wonderful family. He's going to share with us how they get started, and I'm going to kick it off to him so that we can stay on time.
Thanks, Jana. I hope everyone can hear me okay. This is the second year in a row that I'm doing this conference virtually, so I made Jana promise that next year I get to meet you in person. What I want to do is kind of talk a little bit today around kind of smart money and what is the ROI to. Ryan, if you click to the next slide, what I want to do is walk through a little bit about the BlueZones and our solution, if you don't know, how we right now spend money dumb and other better ways to spend it, and then kind of go into a little bit of a couple case studies from some of the work that we do to kind of give you a vision around kind of how can we prioritize our spending. Ryan, next slide, and actually you can go 2 slides. And then again, please just build this out, Ryan. Thank you. If you look at the BlueZone solution, what we tried to do is back in 1999, back 1 slide, Ryan, thank you. If you look at what we tried to do back in 1999 is there was a study called the Danish Twin Studies that said 80% of how long we live is determined by lifestyle factors and our habits, and only 20% is genetics. So what we wanted to do is find these places that you see on the screen in partnership with National Geographic, in partnership with other experts, and these are places where they have less disease. You had less cancers, less cardiovascular disease, like cancers, less diabetes, less hip replacements in the community, less smoking, less depression in these communities, even less dementia compared to other communities, which I think is really important. But the 2 other things that I also thought were really interesting was 4 out of 5 of these communities lived at or below the poverty line. And then the second thing, which was the big aha moment for me, was as I did these travels, never once did I meet somebody at age 50 who went on a diet or started exercising. It was never a journey for these people. It was never something that they said at age 50, you know what, I want to go on a diet so I live to 100. Longevity wasn't pursued, rather it ensued because of their environment, because of how that choice architecture was set up in their community. Next slide, Ryan, and go all the way until the circle opens up, please. So through our work, what we were able to do is define the 9 commonalities that flew through all the different regions. And what you'll see here is it wasn't only diets, it wasn't only exercise. They were really important factors, but you also had a focus on mental health and a focus on community. And when I say community, it's how do we come together socially as a family and as individuals, as an engaged community base that is supporting each other's well-being. Next slide. My brother Dan wrote up these stories for National Geographic. Next slide, Ryan, which is one of the best-selling National Geographics that in history. Ryan, please, thank you. What we were able to find, though, back in 2009, when we tried to bring these lessons to America, was the life radius is what mattered. Is the solution model had to focus in on how and where do we spend our time. to really design our communities where that healthy choices is a lot easier, to look at policies in our communities that create more walkable and bikeable communities, better placemaking, to create healthier food systems where everybody everywhere, no matter what your socioeconomic status, has access and can afford healthy foods, to look at our policies around tobacco that make it easier for us to quit and harder for our kids to start. You also want to look at the places where we spend our time, our work sites, our restaurants, grocery stores. You want to look at our schools, our faith-based institutions, and set up healthy nudges inside of those organizations, designed so the people that are interacting in those places can live longer, healthier lives. But then that people place is, I think, the one that's most important. How do you get people to not only look at their own lives around their well-being, but how do you help them be involved in the design of the community and the well-being of the community, but also in that process, being an engaged community where everyone is supporting everyone else's well-being. So you're all in this together. It isn't an individual journey, but it's a community journey of well-being. Next slide, Ryan. So we did a case study where what we found out was the Surgeon General came and said, hey, if you create this life radius, what you end up getting out of it is these are places where you're taking health, you're taking a community where there's no pride, and you're turning it to a place of hope inside of it. Getting a little feedback, Ryan. Next slide. So, no, go back, Ryan. Thank you. So we've now, and I don't know if there's anything you can do about the feedback, Ryan. I think one of these things are off mute. The production one, if that can be muted. What we ended up finding is that we're now in 61 communities, 4.4 million lives. Where you see the yellow dots are there places where we add blue zone communities. Where you see the blue dots, that's basically my job in the next couple of years, is to bring blue zones to those communities. And the reason why is what they've said is this life radius is important to us because it's where people want to move. It's where people want to have jobs, where there's good, healthy schools, where there's activities, where there's things for me to do. It's safe places where I can raise my family, where kids can walk and have healthy access to fresh fruits and vegetables. That these matter. And then the orange one, these are the communities that we're in talks with, that are thinking about a new narrative around well-being in their community. A new narrative post-pandemic that's not just around health. And yeah, we survived it, but also focused on equity. You know, as I've traveled around to most of these communities, even in the last year, and what I found is that the narrative of our communities needs to change. They need to change to workforce development. They need to change to healthy well-being design in there. They you know, in all the travels that I've done, every single community tells me they're different. Problem is every community has those impacts around health that I mentioned earlier, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, that impact those communities in very negatively financially. Next slide, Ryan. So what I wanted to do is just really quickly kind of talk about kind of how we spend money now in the workforce erosion. Next slide. The Surgeon General came out with a report. It's about 200 pages. I'm not going to make you read it. Instead, I'll just highlight it. You know, what he talked about in that slide, in that paper is a couple things. He talked about the American condition and how healthy communities and economic prosperity are intrinsically linked together. You can't have one without the other. And you saw that during the pandemic, right? But the other thing he talks about is a healthcare disadvantage. That if you're looking at workforce development, if you're looking at developing of our communities, health has an unfair disadvantage to the workforces in the United States. Rising claims costs cost our workforces a lot of money. And when people get sick, it impacts our productivity, impacts our health. And those are even highlighted in some of those more vulnerable populations, marginalized populations. Next slide. What you end up seeing though is if you look at people that are going to work today, 6 out of 10 of them have at least one chronic disease. 4 out of 10 have 2. Now that impacts their productivity and impacts their health. Next slide, Ryan. But what you end up doing, a lot of people are saying, well, that's just the marginalized population, but it's not true. It's not. If you look at affluent people in our communities compared to other countries around the world, we have some of the worst healthcare and productivity impacts in this country than anywhere else. And it's because of our health. Next slide. We spend over $3.5 trillion around health. You can go to the next slide, Ryan. Over $3.5 trillion on healthcare right now. And we're getting some of the worst results compared to kind of other communities, in the world. Ryan, I don't know if my slide deck is just delayed. Do one more even after that, please. So where's the smart money? Where should we be focused on spending in our communities? I argue it's investing into, you can go one back, no. I argue that it's investing into coalitions. It's investing into measurable impact, knowing that what are you doing is measurable and knowing how you measure it, so that when you're setting goals, you can make sure that you're actually driving to them and that they're impactful. They matter. They're what you and the community want. Next slide. When you look at right now in our communities, we have some good funding, some good opportunities with the rescue funds in our communities. And what we've seen with BlueZones is through the conversations is I believe strongly they need to be partnered with not only just public funds, but public-private partnerships. Public-private partnerships that are designing communities in the way that focus on well-being. They focus on the health of the community. And when you look at the work that we've done around the country, workforces, large employers, hospital systems that are seeing value of designs of healthy communities, payers in our community, those are the ones that are reaping the benefits, and they should be partnering with you at the community around matching dollars for those rescue funds that ideally create sustainability in these private-public partnerships. Not only sustainability from a financial standpoint, but ideally from an operational standpoint. Next slide. It also needs to be measurable. The impact of the work that we do in the communities, they need to be measurable. You have to understand what the goal is. You have to understand what success is, and everybody in that partnership needs to be accountable to it. We're in Albert Lee, a population of 18,000. I'll talk about it a little bit more, and you can click the next slide. Click just one button, perfect. What they ended up seeing is about a $40 million ROI on more investment into the community because of those coalitions, because of those partnerships. In the Beach Cities community, you saw huge impact tied to childhood obesity drop because you made more walkable. That investment makes sense. In Fort Worth, you had over 500 organizations partnering at the table, over 90,000 residents engaged. And it even works at a work site and employer-based model. But if you go to the next slide, Ryan, what I love about these, if you can do semi-permanent to permanent changes of it, then what you're going to see is it's sustainable. Next slide, Ryan. It's sustainable. Even one more. The whole next slide. Thank you. What you see in there is that these are not only sustainable, but this impact keeps on compounding. So as you're developing communities that not only you reap in those benefits around health, but the economic development. In Fort Worth, they saw probably about $500 million in that on grants because of the coalitions and those partnerships. Next slide. And that has to be measurable. And you can even go one more. When you look at even one more slide, Ryan. When you look at it, what we try to do is measure it not just on wellness. It's not just about, hey, can somebody walk? But it's well-being. Does people have a sense of purpose, a reason to get up in the morning and a way to live it out? What is the social health? How does your community impact your well-being? What's your financial, not how much money do you make?
Well, while we wait for Nick to be able to join us back again, we will have Josh present on AARP. And do you have his slides queued up?
Coming up.
Thank you.
See him working. Well, sorry we lost Nick, and I wish we would have gotten to hear a little bit about Nick's case study, because I think you'll see a lot of commonalities between Nick's work on BlueZones and my work with AARP and our work on livability. A couple of quick things in the next 45 minutes. That was a joke, everybody. We have a break in about 10 minutes. We're going to cover 3 things very quickly, and I already talk fast, and so I'm going to try and calm myself down here a little bit, especially knowing we're under the gun. But I want to cover 3 things quickly that we talked about beforehand. I want to talk a little bit about why AARP and livability. I think the information might surprise you. We're going to talk about livability and economic impacts, and then we never do anything at AARP without finding some resources to help make it happen. So first, why AARP and livability? I know the governor talks about North Dakota getting younger. That's awesome and great. Here's the reality. Demographics still show we're continuing to age. This is a map of North Dakota, in case you didn't notice that already, broken down by counties. The darker the purple on the map, the higher the percentage of the population that's aged 65 and older. At AARP, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that actually looks at 50 plus. And so I wish it would show 50 and older, but you'll see the trend is a number of counties in North Dakota are continuing to age in communities. One of the things we do very well at AARP is talk to our members about what do they care about and what are they thinking about. So knowing that we have an aging population in many places in North Dakota and a high propensity of residents to be over the age of 50 in North Dakota, we surveyed last year during the pandemic about wants and needs of our membership and just folks generally 45 and older. So we asked a question about what is it that you find important or is going to be personally important to you in the next series of years. Number 1 is caring for a loved one, right? Want to make sure their loved ones are cared for. Second is having high quality long-term care in your community. I think you'll find in here that that doesn't necessarily just mean a nursing home. Nothing wrong with nursing homes, but people want to continue to age in their community and in their own home. And if you know of anything about the impacts of COVID, finding a way to provide long-term care within communities is certainly up there. Obviously, you can see the rest on the screen. I won't go through the rest of those. It's part of it. But then we asked a follow-up question about what is it that was important to them about their community and what did they want to find in their communities. Number 1 on the list, surprise, surprise, safe streets. Sound familiar? Some of you who are in communities and understand this probably know this better than even we do and whatnot. Second was affordable housing. The rest on the list as part of it. And yes, even in North Dakota, 12% of folks older than 45 think bike lanes are important or very important in their community. Okay, and this is not just urban communities that we surveyed. So why do we care? Well, AARP did a study in 2019. December of 2019, we released a report called The Longevity Economy. If you segmented out Americans 50 and older, they would have the 3rd largest GDP in the world. And it's growing. It's not just stagnant and peaking and going down. It's going to continue to increase as we move forward. And so at AARP, we know that. We've been working on this since 2012 through what we call our network of age-friendly states and communities. So it's a system that really empowers communities to partner. It's a statement by elected leadership that they care about making a community a great place for all ages. It's not just older adults. By the way, older adults and Gen Xers generally want the same things. I don't have time to get into that. You can come to my TED Talk later on about that. But when you look at this map, I want to point out a couple of things, because when I've talked about this to other groups before, they say, well, that's just large communities, Josh. It's just big communities that are doing that and are looking at that. Well, I put this, it's hard to read. They told me that it doesn't work. It's probably hard to read on the screen when it gets blown up. 45% of the communities in our over 500 communities that have gone through the network or are enrolled in the network of age-friendly states and communities, of those, 45% have a population that's fewer than 25,000 people. So almost half of them are communities that would look and feel a lot like North Dakota in terms of population and size. Only 14% have more than 400,000, okay? Of those, well, this is all government driven. 37% are run or led by government agencies. 33% are led by some sort of age-friendly advisory committee or group. You might note, my pride and joy is I don't see Daniel or Ben in the room. I see Don over here. It's part of it. North Dakota finally got our first community earlier this year. Bismarck enrolled and became a member of the Network of Age-Friendly Communities. Age-Friendly Network of Age-Friendly States and Communities. See, I get myself going too fast. This slide's going to look awfully similar if you were listening to Nick's presentation. Nick talked about the Power 9. We talk about 8 domains of Network of Age-Friendly States and Communities, from outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, communication, information, civic participation, employment, respect and social inclusion, health services, social participation, and housing. So what? Well, here's what we know. And this is still pretty preliminary, but we've done some digging into what's happened in those communities that have enrolled in the Network of Age-Friendly Communities. So 60% of member communities achieved a change in public policy by integrating their age-friendly lens. So they had some sort of public policy change into their community planning that helped them use an age-friendly lens to think about how they're going to make their community better for people of all ages. 34% achieved a private sector investment or action. So that could be a local retailer, a restaurant securing age-friendly business designations, commitments by builders to expand the use of their age-friendly design standards, or partnerships with taxi services or others to provide discounted rides to older adults and others. 85% described other successes, such as raising awareness about livability issues, increasing collaborations, or educational enhancements. What about in the age of COVID? What happened in the age of COVID with Network of Age-Friendly States and Communities during COVID? One of the things we found, and this was very early, we're still digging into this and they're still looking at what this means and what this looked like, but one of the things we found out very quickly is those communities that were enrolled in the Network of Age-Friendly States and Communities prior to the pandemic were very well positioned to respond to the pandemic. Why? They had effective and diverse partnerships in place. They had identified ahead of time where their gaps were, what their needs were, what were things that they were trying to enhance or program or put in place to adjust to what the changing needs of their community were. And then additionally, while their community responses spanned all 8 friendly domains, there were 3 common themes. Access to food. I think many times people don't understand older adults and access to food rely on a number of different programs and services that were shut down, isolated, put away. Additionally, older adults have different communication needs and communications preferences than many ways that we were communicating to folks. And so having to step that up and then keeping them engaged. Social isolation is already a problem. This is what that looks like. I can point you to where that chart is in just a second as part of it, but all kinds of different opportunities or things that folks did during the pandemic based on the domain that you can look through. So I'm out of time, but I want to leave you with this last slide, which is resources to make it happen. So if you do nothing else today from this presentation or from my presentation, if you don't subscribe to the AARP Livable Communities e-newsletter, you should. It's free. You don't have to be an AARP member. You don't have to be a member of the Network of Age-Friendly States and Communities. It is a newsletter that is done weekly that talks about different best practices, different solutions, different resources to help you and your communities make a difference and implement some of these changes and things that happen. The second is, as many of you are astutely aware, the governor talked about it, Chuck touched on it in his keynote speech and whatnot, there are lots of dollars coming your way, whether you're a large community, small community, whatnot. AARP put out the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 and older adults. It is kind of a how-to guide of how to implement an age-friendly lens as you start thinking about how to implement those dollars and resources. I can tell you the number one thing that folks have been talking about, at least as we've been talking about it, housing and transportation. Sound familiar? Sound like infrastructure issues to you? It does to me. And so the last slide that's on there, the governor talked about walk scores. Walk scores are great. AARP took the walk score and then also added what we call the Livability Index. So it looks at a number of those different measures as well. You can find all of that at aarp.org/livable. I will be around for the rest of the day today as well. Happy to talk more about either joining the network in your community, pursuing that, or any of our other resources. If you want the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, for those of you who are online, you can go into the virtual exhibit hall. It's easy to download right off of there. If you go to, for those of you in the room, if you go to aarp.org/livable, it is the first story on aarp.org/livable right now, or at least it was last night at 9:30 when I checked. So assuming they haven't updated it this morning there. So thanks for having me. I wish we would have had more time to talk and take questions. So. We're done, right?
Well, thank you guys. Thank you all for joining. I'm sorry that we lost Nick. Just like Josh said, he's around all day. I'm around all day to answer questions about BlueZones, about projects related to BlueZones and how your community can be involved. We really appreciate all the time that you've taken to be here today, and we are very excited about what that means. So go enjoy lunch, and we'll see you all back here after that.